Hey, I'm Kamara Rose, and this is Everyday Changemakers. Conversations with social change practitioners about the journey of personal transformation and social transformation.
Me as a minister, I'm interested in people thinking that they are creative no matter who they are. And I want every single person to think that they have the potential to be artists and therefore have the potential to be prophets in society.
This week, I visit Micah Bucey, minister at Judson Memorial Church in New York City, a congregation committed to authentic, expansive Christian practice with occasional glitter. Micah was named for the prophet who called people to act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly. He grew up in Northeast Ohio in a small town outside of Cleveland where his father was a minister. Church, God, and community were ingrained in Micah from the earliest moments he can remember. And when he went to college at Fordham University in New York, his plan was to major in theology and art, and then go on to seminary, following in his father's footsteps to become a minister himself.
Halfway through my undergrad years at Fordham, I realized that I was gay and really pretty immediately left my path toward ministry. And my father had never told me that being a gay man would be incompatible with being a Christian or a person of faith. I had gotten that reading kind of more fundamentalist Christian literature, which at that time, because I was so young, like age 14 to 18, I was unaware that I was reading fundamentalist Christian literature, but it was sort of insidiously putting that idea into my head that anyone who would pursue life as a queer person would not be welcome in this Christian community. And what I was finding was that my life with like the queer artists of the city and at my school felt more life-giving than my church community at that moment. I felt closer to something called God when I was making art with these people than when I was receiving what had always been said to me was God, what I needed to do. One felt like an obligation, one felt like a true invitation. So I said, well, then this will be my church.
Micah left the path he had always imagined for himself. And for the next 9 years, despite his father continually asking if he wanted to go back to church, Micah always said no.
And then one day, I was working at this agency that represents artists. And I was on the phone with an artist who kept calling and really wanted to be represented by the agency. And I was the buffer between the artists and the agents. And it was my job to tell him, like, I'm sorry, like you've submitted, the answer is no, we just can't take you on at this time. And he said, you always say no. I know that you have a yes in you somewhere. When can you say yes? And that truly stuck with me. And I was sort of like, oh my gosh, my job basically right now, I work for amazing women who say yes to so many artists and support them in ways that they need. But my job is to say no to people when they keep calling and we can't take them on. And I said, I've got to find a way to say yes. We only know how to say yes to artists if we can immediately see how to take hold of their art and commodify it. What he was asking me to do, I think, was to say yes to things that I had no idea how to immediately, understand. And to me, that is faith. He was asking me to have faith in artists that I thought I had to say no to. And luckily, because I had the context of having a minister father and having wanted to be a minister at some point, I was like, oh my gosh, this might be a moment of call. This might be somehow that nudge from a God or whatever to go back to this idea of being a minister. And so I called my dad, and at that point I also told him that I was gay. And my dad said, okay, I've been waiting for this. I've been studying. I've been preparing for this, and I'm ready. So you be ready. Now go be who you need to be. What basically happened to me in the moment that I came out to my father was that I realized that my father had been saying yes for years while I had been saying no. And it was this incredible moment of realizing that all of these things I thought I had to compartmentalize and couldn't coexist, could exist together. My queerness was now supported by my faithful father. My idea of art and this idea of saying yes to people could be put together with some idea of church. I hadn't found the church yet, but I went on this journey to kind of figure out where I could find a church home where my queerness would be embraced and my desire to help artists would be embraced. And I found Judson and basically said, this is what I need from a church. And they said, okay, great. We've been doing that for decades.
Micah started at Judson Memorial Church as a student and progressed through all the titles, from student minister to arts minister to assistant minister, and today, minister. We talked about his approach to church and what Micah calls spaghetti ministry, creating a culture of trying things out, experimenting, and saying yes.
When I first came to Judson and I met with Donna, who is now my boss, she changed my life on the day that we had our first meeting, because we sat down and I told her, like, I want to start these arts programs. And again, like, I'm still kind of in the mode of no's, right? Like I'm inching toward saying yes to myself. And Donna, who Donna is an amazing and quirky and really, really like legendary leader. She was like, well, great. Well, I don't have any money right now. We have the space. And we probably have like some volunteers who will help you out. So if you're willing to kind of like throw this at the wall and see if it sticks, like, great. And so I call this spaghetti ministry. It's like, why shouldn't churches be places where people come and say, like, I want to try this thing, and where the minister or the community says, you know what, we have a practice here of giving somebody like 2 months or whatever, and try it, because everywhere else in the world, I think, basically says no. I do believe that church is uniquely positioned to be a testing ground for yeses, to be the place where you can come and participate in a research and development center for how to be a human being. You strip so many other things from church, and that to me is the thing to keep church going.
And maybe you can give some examples here of experiments that you've seen, like stuff that people were able to be like, sure, let's try that on, and what you witnessed, both, I think, in terms of, what actually happened, but also what did you witness in the community as a result of just saying, yes, we'll try it on.
Absolutely. When I came to Judson and started working here, I essentially said to them, what I want to do is start a weekly arts series where we have a free meal so people can eat for free. We have free art so people can be fed, and nurtured artistically for free. And what that will magically do is get people who are coming to see free art, and then get people who are coming to get free food, which are usually different populations. Most of the people coming for the free food are going to be homeless folks or food insecure folks. Most of the people coming for the free art are hipsters in the city who are used to really only being in spaces with their friends and supporting each other's art. I want them to be invited into a space where they're saying yes to each other too. And I'm just going to do this over here and see what happens. And so it's been like 8 years that we've been doing this. What I see happening to people when they participate in the arts programs is essentially that when people come and see people who are calling themselves artists fail in the moment, I think the magical thing that happens is that people who have never enacted creativity and thought of themselves as artists, they suddenly see like, oh, heck, people can call themselves artists and still have a disaster on their hands on a given night. So maybe I can create that thing that I've been telling myself, no, I can't create forever. Me as a minister, I'm interested in people thinking that they are creative no matter who they are. And I want every single person to think that they have the potential to be artists and therefore have potential to be prophets in society. And I think especially church people, we classically look at prophets and prophecy as being foretelling what's going to happen, and basically people who are bringing judgment on the world. And I tend to think of what the prophets were doing as injecting the world with like lots of questions and lots of fodder for conversation, oftentimes in like really brutal terms, but that they were performance artists, that they wanted to kind of throw people off kilter, and that's what Isaiah was doing, that's what Jeremiah was doing, that's what Micah was doing. And so I think of artists today as being people who just come in and kind of throw everything that we thought, should be the status quo off kilter and give us new horizons for our imagination to point toward. And I think that everybody has the potential to do that. I think it's very easy to keep yourself from doing it. But when I introduce all of the arts programs here, I always say that we believe that artists have the potential to serve as our modern day prophets because they show us where we've been, they show us who we are, and they show us what we can become. And that, to me, is what a prophetic voice can do in the world. And when we start to think of prophets in that way, when we start to think of them as creatives and stop thinking about them as something in ancient history, but actually as something that exists inside us, I think it has the power to transform us and how we think of ourselves and our role in the world.
Hi, everyone. I'm breaking in here to let you know about a resource I developed to help you find and express your own prophetic voice. It's a guided meditation and reflection tool, and you can find it at kamararose.com/resources. The link is also in the show notes. If you want to practice experimenting and saying yes to your own creativity and voice, use the guide to support you. And then practice being a modern day prophet and share it with the world. I really can't wait to see what you create. So go to kamararose.com/resources to download the guide and give it a try. Okay, back to the conversation. In addition to the work Micah does to cultivate prophetic art and creativity at Judson Memorial, he's also an activist with the New Sanctuary Coalition of New York City, which is an interfaith network of congregations, organizations, and individuals standing publicly in solidarity with families and communities resisting detention and deportation. Judson Memorial Church helped form the New Sanctuary Coalition back in 2007. And while Micah wasn't there in the beginning, he does think that the coalition is another powerful example of saying yes to experimentation.
Immigration in this country is such an issue that has seemed kind of hopeless for a while, that they were not having much success getting funding. They were not having much success getting anything pushed forward legislatively, but they just kept trucking along. They started something called the accompaniment program. And the accompaniment program, very simply, was volunteers from New Sanctuary Coalition going with immigrants who had to check in with ICE at 26 Federal Plaza, essentially going to bear witness. It showed ICE officers that there was a cloud of witnesses around these people as they entered. It also made the immigrants feel supported. So then when we get to the election of Trump in 2016 and the real fear of what his rhetoric was going to do to immigrants and the immigration debate in this country, suddenly all of these people became activists. They had been kind of church people. They were church people well, yes, we just go with people. But when they saw that kind of bottom fall out and really the attack on immigrants start to really happen just out in the light, in the open, suddenly people were activated to think of themselves as leaders in a way that I don't think they had thought of themselves as leaders before. Maybe somewhere in the office of New Sanctuary Coalition, they really, from the start, were this is the way to get more activists. I don't know that it happened that way. I think that it was just what looked like charity work was actually, it was organizing work. So now there's this gigantic network of people who have been changed because they were just seeing what happens in the system. And so now when a rally is called, for support of an immigrant who's been detained or is being, in danger of being deported, hundreds to thousands of people show up in a way that didn't happen like 7 to 10 years ago, because nobody really was inside it enough to really understand. But now we have these folks that they've been radicalized, and they consider themselves capable of doing the work. So they're not waiting for a leader to kind of like be the one who's speaking for them. They're speaking, and they're doing the work.
Well, it goes to show how, I mean, with any social issue like immigration, depending on your status in society, it's easy to feel disconnected from that. And that is a great example of sort of this transition between what you call charity, or what in organizing we might call like direct service.
Totally.
Right?
Absolutely.
But like doing something that isn't really policy work, or it's just this, yes, I'll accompany you, but that the experience of being witness to and understanding, it's like, oh, now I feel like I do understand both the system and how people are impacted. And now I feel like, of course, I understand we need to change the system. And I have personal experience of my own, of why.
Yeah. It's so funny because I've, for the past few years, I have told people about 26 Federal Plaza, where the building is so strangely put together that it's actually truly disorienting. It's difficult to find what floor you're supposed to be on. It's difficult to find what room you're supposed to be at. It's difficult to even like navigate the hallways. It's difficult to find the sheet where it says like what time you're supposed to be at what room. It all seems designed to kind of just make you feel disoriented. So I try to describe that to people, and they sort of like look at me and nod, and they sort of like kind of vaguely understand. But then if you accompany somebody and are forced into that situation of having to walk with them as they try to figure out why they took off work and have the threat of being fired so that they can like stumble around this building and try to figure out what judge they're supposed to see, and you participate in that with them, I see people like they understand it in a way that, like, again, this 38-year-old white kid from Northeast Ohio, me explaining it seems like, well, yeah, I get it. It's like it's an awful system. But no, when you're in the system with somebody who's being, actually oppressed by this country, it changes you in a way that I don't have the power to do even with words.
Well, and it kind of comes back to your idea of spaghetti ministry in the sense of try it. You try it. Just try it. Like, I mean, because I think that spirit of experimentation, there's two kinds of ways of experimenting. One is, oh, I really want to do this thing and I want to try it. Another is kind of that invitation of, why don't you try this thing and just see?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I feel like there is this kind of, for lack of a better word, there's like this kind of hippy dippy feeling to like, try it, experiment, do it. And it's like, but actually, and I find myself being radicalized by this, by having a father who said, try it, see who you want to be and who you can be in this world. And then a leader like Donna at Judson who said, try it. I don't have any money. Like, if you're in school and you can figure out how to make this work while you're there, try it. And then neither is going to be disastrous, because if it all comes crumbling down, then you try something else. That actually it radicalized me. It made me believe in the power of experimentation, the power of saying yes, the power of spaghetti ministry, and I will go to my grave like screaming that into people's faces. It's because I do think it really works.
And I wonder if there's something you might be able to describe then, about the culture of an organization that allows that to happen. Not to be too mundane, but I think sometimes it's helpful for people to think, okay, if I'm in my institution or place and I'm wanting to bring a lens of experimenting with new things, or a lens of saying yes to something that we haven't, what might people do that's like, if it's on the one-to-one level or the small group level, but that fosters that type of environment?
Totally. I think I have an answer that I think would be more general for anybody. And then I have an answer that I think would be specific to churches. The first, more universal one, at Judson, we've incorporated something called Pop Labs that are kind of a fancy word for basically focused table discussion. But it essentially is lightly themed It is set up sort of like a 12-step meeting, so you have timed sections for you to answer so that, no one dominates the space and sort of, is the talker. But we have focused questions that are about the past, the present, and the future, that are asking about art, that are asking about justice, that are asking about faith. And essentially what we use it for is not only a way of getting the congregation to know one another better, but it's a way of having a litmus test for where your congregation is, or if you're not at a church, if you're at an organization, where your organization is. And instead of bringing in an outside facilitator who does all the fancy things that that they do very well, this is it's totally run by yourselves. You commit to 3 hours where you're sitting at table together and you say great, this is the question we're answering. You each get 2 minutes. And the question is, what's the first piece of art that you remember transforming your life? And suddenly you not only know more about the 10 people that you're sitting around the table with than you ever did before, but I've pulled out stuff for services from just hearing that there was an 80-year-old man who said well, the song that changed my life was this song, and I always sing it to my wife, when we're getting ready for bed. And then I was well, why don't we sing it in a service one day? And so we suddenly had an 80-year-old man singing this American Songbook song. And so I see that as being just an invitation to a testing ground of A, getting to know each other better, and B, giving yourselves content. For us, it's for services. Specific to churches, I talk on a lot of panels where basically they end up asking me well, how do churches survive? With people not coming to church, how do you keep the church going? And my answer really is if you have space, give it for free to artists and to organizers. Give it for free. Go out into the community, find out from artists hey, do you want to have a Wednesday night music night? Go to organizers and say hey, are you organizing rallies? We have space for you. And they will change your institution if you just are giving them space. Because what we don't have in this country anymore is sort of open space for people to create and organize. And churches have a ton of space. They have a ton of space that's lying dormant. So just bring them in. What naturally will happen is they will see your congregation in the hallways. You'll start talking. They'll kind of be curious about your service, and they'll maybe pop in on a Sunday just because they're there for their organizing meeting that starts right after service. And you will change the alchemy in your space. And I see both of those things as an invitation to saying yes to innovation.
Well, and also, and this is sort of your ministerial hat, I guess, but on a personal level, for people that are wanting to, maybe it's to try something new or sort of claim some part of themselves more fully, are there specific practices or supports you would say, almost like a counsel, here's what I would advise?
I think in an increasingly noisy society, I know that I have to have silence. I have to have moments of silence, especially in the morning when I'm preparing for the day. I think in terms of finding your inner creative and your inner artist, I always suggest, especially to artists in my life who are really hitting a stumbling block or have writer's block, basically, timed sessions where you tell yourself, okay, I'm going to create something. I'm going to write a song. I'm going to, write prose, and I'm only going to do it for 5 minutes. For me, what that magically does is after a few weeks of doing it for only 5 minutes, you're going to want to do it for 10 minutes. Then, after several weeks of that, you're going to want to do it longer. And I think of that as sort of a meditation. So it's like when you're meditating, you meditate on your breath and on one, right? But the idea is that if your mind starts to wander, you just bring yourself back to one. For me, it's that if you then hit writer's block and you can't fill an hour with writing anymore, then you go back to 5 minutes. And for me, that's the only way that I've sustained a creative life, even as my life is filled with more and more noise, as with the work that I have to do at Judson. But I say silence and timed moments for creativity are the things that sustain me.
And what's your creative practice? When you'd give yourself 5 minutes, what are you doing?
Mostly writing lyrics to songs. Really, I can feel it when I can feel the way that it informs my day when I do it, and I can feel the void when I don't do it in the morning. And I think that we live in, especially in a US society, that convinces us that like taking time for those kinds of private transformative moments, if you cannot see their immediate value, then they aren't valuable. But I think that we're seeing that in kind of the burnout that we're feeling right now, those are the things that sustain us. And when you don't do it, then you start to feel the cumulative effect of that.
Hi, everyone. I'm taking a short break here to let you know about our guest next week, Joy Friedman. Joy is the Director of Organizing for the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism.
I think our fears are our beliefs. And part of the job of an organizer is to help people recognize that those are not truths necessarily. They're beliefs, and we could try out other beliefs. And I don't think there's any way to let go of those fears without facing them.
Listen next week as we talk about how Joy found her own sense of power through organizing and what it takes to work in community, even when it's messy, to create change. Okay, back to the conversation. What do you think is possible, right? If we're fostering, whether it's church communities or organizing or social impact companies even, or there's lots of different spaces. But if we're fostering these places where there is this personal cultivation of saying yes to the self, whatever that creative cultivation, and the collective cultivation of trying new things together and sort of broadening, what do you imagine is possible, or what do you imagine that could create when we're thinking about social change, social justice?
I feel like there is more and more potential for cutting yourself off from other people than there ever has been, even as we have, these kind of social media platforms that seem to connect us more. I see people closing themselves off more. And, there are much smarter people than me, like writing lots of think pieces about, why there's such a cultural divide in the US right now. But I think it is about people not getting to know each other. And so, again, that goes back to saying yes. I consider it my duty to get to know people who immediately turn me off. If their politics are turning me off, if their art is turning me off, if their demeanor is turning me off, I really do take a breath and maybe have a meditative moment, but I really do consider it my obligation to pursue a relationship with the person. Sometimes that annoys the hell out of them, but for me, it's my little way of saying, like, I do think that the only way that we can transform society is in those interpersonal relationships that we cultivate, one-on-one, and not to tell stories out of school, but I get a lot of calls and emails from congregants about other congregants and saying, like, I don't understand why so-and-so did this, so I'm pulling out of being on this committee or whatever. And I always say, like, first of all, I'm never going to tell you that you shouldn't be on that committee. I'm never going to tell you that you shouldn't do this thing. I'm also never going to accuse you of being petty, but you've committed to being part of this community. That person is also committed to being part of this community. Why can't the two of you come together and talk this through? And I see that as being something that has the potential to change society outside as well. I see it with the New Sanctuary Coalition. I didn't know what I thought about immigration before I started meeting immigrants and before I started going on accompaniments. And now I have been moved to tell these stories to other people. I have family members who don't understand why I fight for immigrants and why I've dedicated myself so deeply to this. But I can feel when I tell them stories, when I introduce them to the immigrants I'm working with, they are changed. So, this is all a long way of saying getting to know each other.
Do you have an example of somebody that you personally were like, they rubbed you the wrong way and you pursued the relationship. I'm just curious if you can describe what might have happened in one of those encounters.
Sure. I mean, I have, there's someone in my life who essentially said, like, I don't like you. I don't get you. I don't trust your smile. I don't think that you're being authentic when you're friendly. And I said, okay. So then what we're going to do is get together and tell stories. And I want to hear from you, what happened, where you don't trust smiles, who hurt you. And I want to tell you precisely why, I try to approach things optimistically. And he and I have kind of, we've become friends. There's an episode of The Golden Girls where Rose is, and the Golden Girls is almost literally my Bible. Don't tell the folks who actually wrote the Bible with a capital B. But The Golden Girls, I think, like, has so many amazing comments on the foibles of human beings. And there's an episode where Rose has a coworker who basically says, like, I don't like you, and it's just going to be that way. And she becomes obsessed with she buys him a dog. She does all of these things to get him to like her because she's obsessed with the fact that he doesn't like her and that everybody likes her. And the key in this relationship with this gentleman was that once I realized that what my goal was to not like fill the hole I felt, which was that, like, wait a minute, everybody likes me. I need for this person to like me. And instead it was about connection and about understanding, why we might just not jive. It made us friends. And we still don't jive on everything. And there's an appreciation there, but we've also found shared work. So this person is also heavily involved in the immigration work, heavily involved in some other things here at Judson. And I think shared work is an amazing way to fill that place where you don't think that you'd ever meet on another plane.
I love all these overall threads that you've brought together, and I love the really concrete examples that you gave, just demonstrating how some of these things are alive and at work. And I just wanted to give you an invitation if you wanted to offer a prayer, an intention, just calling forth what you hope for, both for the Judson community, but the larger world too.
Oh, wow. That's a big job. That's a big invitation. That's a big yes.
That's why you're Micah.
Great. Well, yeah. Will you join me in an attitude of whatever's comfortable for you? Creative hands of the universe, thank you for time. Thank you for space. Thank you for horizons that we've never thought of, horizons that seem too far away, horizons that seem like we could never, ever, ever reach them, grasp them, or embody them. And thank you for the time and the space you give us to realize that those horizons are not that far away, are not that hard to grasp, and are just waiting for us to embody them. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe, like it, rate it in iTunes, tell your friends, your family, and your colleagues. It is really so helpful to get the word out. Everyday Changemakers is a production of yours truly in collaboration with markmedia.org.